Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Have you ever considered that a gentle, dutiful wife, one who always has dinner ready and has never raised her voice to anyone, could become the most terrifying person in your life? That day, I watched my wife bustling around our open-concept kitchen, the steam from a freshly baked pot roast rising into the air. She turned to me and smiled. It was as peaceful as any other day, but suddenly, a cold chill ran down my spine. It wasn't because of anything she was doing right then, but because of something I had just discovered. Something that proved that for the past 3 years, I had absolutely no idea who my wife really was. 3 years. 3 years living under the same roof in the suburbs, and I had never truly looked at her. Looking back, I realized I was acting like a blind man. I'd come home late from the office. She would still be awake, sitting in the dim light of the living room. She'd ask one question before quietly heading to bed. "Did you eat yet?" That was it. Never more than that one sentence. I'd give a dismissive answer, or sometimes ignore her completely, crawl into bed, and turn my back to her. The next morning when I woke up, breakfast would be waiting on the island counter, my suits perfectly pressed, the house spotless. For 3 years, I blatantly cheated on her. I'd leave early, come home at all hours of the night, and sometimes I wouldn't call home for days. She never got jealous. She never complained. Not once. There were times I literally dropped a girls off right at the end of our driveway, laughing and chatting loudly. She'd stand at the kitchen window, look out, and then quietly return to the stove. I felt grateful, sure, but it also annoyed me. Why didn't she throw a fit? Why? Didn't she smash a plate or scream at me to vent her anger? She was too quiet, to the point where I thought she was completely emotionally numb, like a shadow or a piece of furniture. It wouldn't have mattered if she was there or not. I was awful, I know, but I thought that's just how men are, and as long as I came home and my wife had a hot meal waiting, everything was fine. I gave myself the right to act that way. But there was one detail I hadn't noticed in 3 whole years. Now, sitting here remembering it, my blood runs cold. Every time I walked into a room, her eyes didn't actually look at me. It wasn't anger or resentment. She looked through me like I was an inanimate object, a walking piece of furniture. At the dinner table, as I picked up my fork, she would sit across from me smiling. Her mouth smiled, but her eyes were completely dead. Her smiles were always perfectly timed, like a machine programmed to the millisecond. Thinking back, I shudder at the day I told her I was taking my mistress to Napa Valley for the weekend. She just nodded and asked if I needed her to pack my suitcase. Her voice was as calm as if she were asking what I wanted for breakfast. I was gone all weekend. Not a single missed call, not a single text from her. It gave me peace of mind, but it also irked me. When I got back, the front door was unlocked, a hot plate of food was on the table, and my wife was sitting in her usual spot. She looked up and asked, "Did you have fun?" "Yeah, it was great," I replied, grabbing a beer and turning on the NFL game. She quietly cleared the dishes. The soft clinking of porcelain echoed in the kitchen. I never looked at her. I never asked if she had a good weekend. Never. Now, as I'm about to uncover the truth, I remember one specific night. It was 2 a.m. I had been out drinking and got caught in a massive downpour. I walked in to find her sitting in the pitch-black living room, staring out the window. No lights, no TV, no phone, just a silhouette sitting motionless in the second. Dark. Startled, I asked why she wasn't asleep. She slowly turned around and smiled. "I just really love the sound of the rain." I didn't press further. I just crashed on the bed and passed out. Now I wonder, had she sat there for countless nights in the dark, silently looking out, listening to sounds I never bothered to hear? What was she thinking about during those long nights? Was she crying, feeling a deep simmering hatred? Or was she planning? I started digging through my memories. She woke up at 5 a.m. every day to make coffee, bake muffins, and prep dinner. I never once asked if she was tired. I just ate and left. On the days she was sick, she still dragged herself out of bed to cook. Once, I even snapped at her because the roast was too bland. She just silently took my plate back, seasoned it, and brought it back. Not a single sigh. One time, I saw her sitting with her hand pressed against her forehead, completely pale. I asked, "You sick?" She jolted, waving it off. "It's nothing, just a slight headache." And the most terrifying part, she never rejected me. No matter how horribly I treated her, if I wanted to be intimate that night, she always complied. Sometimes it felt like I was with a moving corpse. Her eyes squeezed shut, her lips pressed tightly together. I hated it, but I still did it. I had the right to, or so I thought. Now I realize that wasn't obedience, that was endurance. A horrific, calculated endurance, pushed to the absolute limit. 3 years. I lived with a woman without ever asking what she liked, what she wanted, what she feared. I didn't know who her friends were, where she went, what she worried about. I never took her to the movies, never bought her a birthday gift, never held her hand walking downtown. I only knew she was a great cook, kept the house immaculate, and never bothered me. I thought that was a good thing. I was so wrong. Wrong from the day she walked into my house as my wife. Looking back, I didn't deserve to be a husband, let alone a father. And I began to fear her silence. Because when a woman is so gentle that she never fights back, one day she will fight back in a way that makes you pay the price. A very heavy price. For 3 years, I was a heartless cheater and she was invisible. But now I had just discovered that her invisibility was the most terrifying thing of all, because I had no idea what she saw. In her silence, she saw everything, and she had been preparing for something. It happened the day Hannah, my mistress, and I had a huge fight downtown. She was throwing a tantrum, demanding to go back to her apartment. I knew if we went there, I'd have to spend hours coaxing her, and I was exhausted. I figured I'd just bring Hannah back to my house for the night. She had an early shift. The next day anyway. Even if my wife was home, it wouldn't matter. My wife was so docile, she'd never dare say a word. I grabbed Hannah's hand and pulled her up. And the driveway. My heart was beating a little fast, but I reassured myself. I unlocked the door. The house was bathed in warm, amber light. The mouth-watering smell of home cooking drifted from the kitchen. On the dining table, dinner was already set. 2 plates, silverware, a beautiful pot roast, mashed potatoes, and a bowl of bright green steamed asparagus. A small vase of fresh roses sat in the center, the petals still glistening with water droplets. I swallowed hard. It was too normal. So normal it was terrifying. My wife stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an old floral apron. She looked at me, then at Hannah. I froze, bracing myself for the dramatic fallout. But no. My wife's lips curled into a smile. She smiled at Hannah. A real smile. Not forced, not sarcastic. "Hi there, come on in. We were just about to eat. Let me get you a plate." Her voice was as light and breezy as if she were welcoming an old college friend. Hannah stood frozen behind me, her fingers digging into the back of my jacket. I could feel her hot breath on my neck. The air in the room felt thick as concrete. I stammered, This is Hannah. A friend from work. She just stopped by." My wife nodded, still smiling. "Oh, I know. I know." What did she know? A chill shot down my spine. But before I could process it, my wife turned back into the kitchen, grabbed another plate and silverware, and set it on the table. Her hands moved swiftly, serving Hannah a locked, generous portion of roast, scooping up the best cuts of meat and drizzling it with gravy. "Please, eat. You must be starving from the drive." Hannah looked at me, her eyes wide with sheer panic. She didn't know what to do. Neither did I. We stood there like statues. Meanwhile, my wife pulled out a chair, sat down, and picked up her fork, looking up at me. "Sit down and eat. It's getting cold." I slumped into my chair. Hannah sat next to me, her face pale as a sheet. Dinner proceeded in absolute silence, save for the soft clinking of silverware against porcelain, the agonizing sound of awkward chewing. Every now and then, my wife would push a side dish toward Hannah. "Eat up, don't be shy." Her hand holding, the fork was steady, her smile unwavering, her eyes still looking right through both of us. I didn't dare look my wife in the eye. I just kept my head down, staring at my plate. A thought flashed through my mind. Why? Why isn't she screaming at me? Why isn't she crying? Why isn't she throwing Hannah out of the house? The only answer I could come up with was that she was just too meek, too passive. And I felt relieved that I had dodged a bullet. After dinner, my wife cleared the table, poured Hannah a glass of iced water, and turned to me. It's supposed to drop into the 40s tonight. Grab an extra blanket for her, okay? She can sleep in the guest room so you two can catch up. Hannah jumped, shaking her head frantically. No, I have to go. I'm leaving. Right now. But my wife had already stood up, walked into the master bedroom, brought out a blanket and pillow, and set them on the couch. Then she walked back into our bedroom and closed the door. The latch clicked softly. No slamming, no drama. Hannah stood in the middle of the living room, clutching her purse, physically shaking. She looked at me and whispered, "Why didn't your wife react? Are you sure she's right in the head?" I couldn't answer. I just stared at the closed bedroom door. A creeping sense of dread began to spread through my chest, a dread I couldn't put a name to. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more everything felt like a bizarre fever. Dream. That night, Hannah and I sat in the living room, not saying a word to each other. She kept staring at the bedroom door as if a monster was going to walk out of it. Around dawn, Hannah begged me to take her home. Before getting out of my car, she looked at me with red, teary eyes. "I am never going back to that house. There is something so wrong there. I'm terrified." I dropped her off and drove back. The sun was just coming up. My wife was already awake, wiping down the kitchen counters, softly humming an unrecognizable tune. On the table, a classic American breakfast was waiting. Oatmeal, scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, 2 portions, one for me, one for Hannah. "Did she leave?" my wife asked, her tone light as air. "Yeah, she left. That's a shame. I was going to make her some chicken noodle soup from scratch." I heard her coughing last night. I stayed quiet. A massive lump formed in my throat. I didn't understand why I couldn't speak, and I didn't dare ask any questions. That night, she had cooked an extra portion for the other woman. And the next time I brought Hannah over, I don't know why, but she did it again. 3 plates, 3 sets of silverware. Hannah sat across from my wife, her face rigid, refusing to make eye contact. I sat between them like a spectator at a pantomime I didn't have the script for. My wife calmly ladled some soup into a bowl and placed it in front of Hannah. "Drink this. Bone broth is great for the immune system. The weather's changing. It's easy to catch a cold." Hannah mumbled a quiet thank you and picked up her spoon to take a sip. I noticed her hand was trembling slightly. My wife kept smiling that warm, maternal smile, her eyes locked onto Hannah. Then, she picked up her fork, cut a tender piece of the pot roast, and placed it on Hannah's plate. And as she did, I saw it. From the wide sleeve of her cardigan, my wife pulled out something tiny, a pinch of a pale yellow powder. She dusted it lightly over to the meat. It happened in a split second, swift and natural, like muscle memory. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. What the hell was that? Seasoning? Medicine? Or... I didn't dare finish the thought. Cold sweat soaked through my shirt. I wanted to scream, to knock the plate out of Hannah's hands, but my limbs felt pinned down by an invisible weight. I just sat there, paralyzed. Hannah didn't notice a thing. She picked up the piece of meat and put it in her mouth. My wife watched her chew, her eyes still smiling, then turned to me with absolute tenderness. "Eat your food, honey. It's getting cold." I picked up my fork. My hand shook violently. I couldn't eat. I couldn't even look at my plate. I just nodded and pretended to push the potatoes around. 1,000 questions exploded in my brain. What did she just put in Hannah's food? Why? How long has she been doing this? And why had I never noticed it before? Dinner dragged on. Hannah finished her plate. My wife offered her more and, again, brought her sleeve over the food. This time, I saw it clearly. It was a small amber glass vial, the kind with a dropper, hidden in her palm. She tapped a tiny amount of powder onto the food and slid it over. "Eat up. This meat is organic, fresh from a farm out near my hometown." Hannah smiled, looking a bit more relaxed. "It's so delicious. Your house always smells so amazing." My wife looked down at her own plate. "Well, you have to know how to cook a good percentage meal if you want to keep your husband. See? Don't I do a good job keeping him? Her voice was soft and even, but my blood turned to ice. Hannah stopped chewing. Her eyes darted from me to my wife in sheer panic. She didn't know what to say. My wife looked up and laughed. I'm just kidding. Eat. The air in the room turned to lead. Hannah stared at her plate, eating faster. Now, I could tell she wanted to bolt. But my wife ate agonizingly slowly, taking tiny, deliberate bites, occasionally glancing up to smile at Hannah. There were moments when I realized her eyes weren't smiling at all. Her pitch-black pupils were locked onto Hannah like a predator watching its prey. I swallowed hard. A thought hit me like a freight train. How many times? How? Many times had my wife done this? To other women? To me? I stared at my own plate. How many meals had I eaten that were cooked by her hands? How many times? Had she served me a special dish with that same gentle smile? My stomach churned, a wave of intense nausea rising to my throat. I pushed my chair back and stood up abruptly. I need to use the restroom. My wife looked at me, still smiling. Sure, go ahead. Hannah and I will keep eating. I bolted for the bathroom, locked the door, and collapsed onto the cold tile floor. My heart was beating like a war drum. I looked in the mirror. My face was ashen, cold sweat dripping down my temples. I whispered to myself, "What did you just see? Is it real? Or are you losing your mind?" I splashed freezing water on my face, desperately trying to calm down. It's just seasoning, I told myself. A special spice she uses. I'm overthinking this. My wife is the sweetest, most passive woman in the world. She wouldn't hurt a fly. But in my mind, the image of her hand dusting that powder over Hannah's food played on a terrifying loop. When I finally walked out, dinner was over. Hannah was sitting on the couch, clutching a glass of water, still looking incredibly anxious. My wife was clearing the table, humming that same nameless tune. She went to the sink and started washing dishes, the clinking of plates. Everything was so overwhelmingly normal. Hannah caught my eye and motioned that she needed to talk. I stepped out onto the back patio. She followed. The night air was biting, the wind whipping her hair around. Her eyes were red. I feel so weird, she whispered. The way your wife looks at me. I can't even describe it. And while you were in the bathroom, she asked if I wanted to stay here for a few days. She said she'd cook me all kinds of great meals. I stayed silent. Hannah grabbed my arm, her grip painfully tight. I'm scared. I'm not staying here. Please, take me home. I nodded. I wanted to get out of that house too. I walked inside, told my wife. I was driving Hannah home. My wife stepped away from the sink, hands still wet, with soap, and smiled. All right, drive safe. Come over again sometime, Hannah. I'll make something new for you. Hannah practically ran to the driveway. Before pulling out, I glanced back in the house. My wife was standing in the living room window, backlit by the warm, amber light. She waved at us, but in the shadows behind her, I could see her arm resting at her side, and slipping back into her cardigan sleeve was the faint glint of that little amber vial. The drive to Hannah's apartment was completely silent. She sat pale and shivering in the passenger seat. When I pulled up, she looked at me and asked, "One question. Does your wife ever cook separate, special meals just for you? Have you ever noticed anything off about them?" I froze. Memories flooded my brain. The specific dishes she'd make just for me. The prime cuts of steak. The rich broths she'd brew whenever I had a cold. The lump in my throat grew so tight I couldn't speak. I went home later that night. My wife was already asleep. On the kitchen island, a plate was kept warm under a cover. Next to it was a sticky note in her elegant handwriting. "Eat up, honey. I made you some chicken broth to help with your hangover." I stared at the steaming bowl. Only one question echoed in my mind. What is in this bowl? Hannah had eaten her entire plate, and the thought made my heart race uncontrollably. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to my wife, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The image of the powder falling onto the meat wouldn't leave my head. It's just a spice, I kept trying to convince myself. My mom used to put weird herbal seasonings in her food too. It's fine. But why hide it? Why keep it in her sleeve? I drifted off just before dawn. When I woke up, it was 8 a.m. and my wife was already out of bed. I walked out to find her wiping down the counters, humming. Breakfast was set. 2 plates. "Where's Hannah?" I asked, feigning ignorance. She left. Texted me early this morning saying she had an emergency. I breathed a sigh of relief but still felt a gnawing anxiety. Why didn't Hannah text me? I grabbed my phone and saw a text from her sent at 6 a.m. I had to go. I feel so sick. I didn't sleep all night. I keep throwing up. Did I eat something bad? Just go back to sleep. I read the text 3 times. Sick. Throwing up. I looked at my wife, standing at the stove, her posture perfect, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. So, painfully normal. I went to work, but my mind was completely consumed by what was happening at home. I texted Hannah, "Are you feeling any better?" She replied hours later, "Still sick. Super lethargic and nauseous. Did she put something in my food last night, or am I going crazy?" I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. I came home late that night, on purpose. I was terrified to sit at the dining table with my wife. I was terrified to look at my plate. When I walked in, she just asked, "Dinner's ready. Did you eat yet?" Then pointed to the covered plate. "Heat it up in the microwave if you're hungry." With that, she walked into the bedroom and shut the door. I sat alone in the silent living room. The grandfather clock ticked heavily. I stared at the kitchen. The shadows in the corners felt suffocating. I stood up and walked slowly toward the cabinets. My heart hammered in my chest. I opened the large pantry door. I rummaged through the familiar spices: salt, pepper, olive oil, garlic powder, paprika, and then I found it. Tucked way in the back, hidden behind a large tin of Earl Grey tea, was a small, amber glass vial, no label. Inside was a pale yellow powder, slightly resembling turmeric but different. Floating in the powder were tiny specks of dried floral matter. I unscrewed the dropper cap and sniffed it. A strange, sweet, but sharply bitter scent hit my nose, shooting straight to my brain and making me dizzy. My hands were shaking violently. I looked around the quiet kitchen. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of the vial, the powder, and exactly where it was hidden in the cabinet. Then I capped it and put it back. Perfectly. I tiptoed out of the kitchen like a burglar in my own home. I collapsed onto the couch, gasping for air. I zoomed in on the photos on my phone. Looking closely at the glass, I noticed a tiny faded scratch. It looked like a symbol, maybe a Chinese character or a chemical shorthand, but it was too worn to tell. My head was spinning. "Calm down," I told myself. "It's just a spice. She's an ADU. Amazing cook. She tries out exotic ingredients. It's normal. My mom had an entire cabinet of holistic herbs. There's nothing to be afraid of. But why hide it? Why put it behind the tea, where no one would ever look? Why no label? And why had I never seen her use it in our regular meals, but only for Hannah?" I texted Hannah, "Where are you? Are you okay?" She replied instantly, "At my apartment. Still sick. Nauseous all day, haven't eaten a thing. I think I'm going to go to CVS to get some stomach meds." "Do that. Let me know when you take them," I typed back. I dropped my phone and buried my face in my hands. The conflict inside me was tearing me apart. On one side was my gentle wife, who hadn't argued with me once in 3 years. On the other side were these bizarre, stacking red flags. I wanted to trust my wife. I had to trust her. She was my family. But the question haunted me. If she was innocent, why was everything so incredibly strange? And if she wasn't, I didn't dare finish the thought. I sat in the dark living room until 2 a.m., staring at our closed bedroom door. Every few minutes, I'd open my phone to look at the picture of the vial. The bitter, sweet scent felt permanently lodged in my sinuses. At 3 a.m., I fell to asleep on the couch. I had a nightmare. I dreamt my wife was cooking. She smiled at me, gentle and sweet. Then, under the warm kitchen lights, her face distorted into something grotesque. Her pitch-black eyes stared at me unblinking. She raised her hand, and from her palm, the amber vial released a toxic, swirling fog. I woke up screaming, drenched in a cold sweat. It was morning. I looked over to the kitchen. My wife was cooking, her hair neatly tied back. On the counter, 3 breakfast plates were set out. Was she cooking for Hannah again today? My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. I feel worse. My body is shaking. Can you take me to urgent care? I read the text, then looked at my wife. She turned around and gave me a warm, loving smile, but her eyes, they were dead. 2 black voids looking straight, threw me into some distant reality. I swallowed hard. I asked myself, how long? Has she had that vial? And how many times has she used it? That morning, I lied and told my wife I had an early meeting. Instead, I drove to a Starbucks near Hannah's apartment to wait for her. When she walked in, she looked terrible. Pale, lips bruised blue. She held her stomach and slumped to the chair. I'm not getting better. I feel so dizzy, she whimpered. Let's go get blood work done, I said, staring blankly out the window. If we got her blood tested, we'd know exactly what was in her system. And if there was something there, what then? I took Hannah to a private clinic. The doctor drew her blood and told us the 7 results would take a few hours. While we waited, I sat in my car, scrolling through my phone. I stared at the photo of the vial. Then, I searched for my wife on Facebook. Her profile was locked down. A few pictures of potted plants, some shared recipes, nothing out of the ordinary. I racked my brain. What did I actually know about my wife? Her name was Sarah. She grew up in rural Ohio. Her mother still lived there. Before we got married, she worked an administrative job at a small logistics firm. When we got married, I told her I wanted her to be a stay-at-home wife, and she agreed instantly. I didn't know where she went, to college, who her friends were, what she liked, what she feared. For 3 years, I never asked. That afternoon, we got the results. The doctor looked at me with a grave expression. There are traces of an unidentified alkaloid compound in her bloodstream. It strongly suggests toxicity. Did she ingest anything unusual? Recently? Hannah started crying, gripping my arm. I stood there, frozen. The doctor advised further specialized toxicology testing and suggested contacting the authorities if we suspected foul play. I drove Hannah back to her apartment and then sped home like a madman. I needed answers. I needed to know who my wife was. I bolted into our bedroom and tore open her closet. Simple, modest dresses folded neatly. I checked the bottom, drawers, underwear, socks. I ran my hands along the bottom panel of the drawer and felt a false bottom. I popped it open. Inside was a small lockbox. I pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside was a diploma. Ohio State University College of Pharmacy. Bachelor of Science in Pharmaceutical Sciences. Summa cum laude. My breath hitched. My hands shook. My wife was a pharmacist? She specialized in chemistry? She had never told me. Not once in 3 years. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to remember. Suddenly, tiny details came rushing back. The special herbal teas she brewed for me. The weirdly specific diets she put me on. The supplements she compounded herself when I felt run down. I thought they were just old family remedies. I dug deeper into the box. I found an old, yellowed photograph. A younger Sarah stood next to a middle-aged man in a white lab coat. Behind them were shelves of industrial compounding equipment and giant jars of dried herbs. I flipped the photo over. Dad and I at the holistic clinic, 2015. Her dad. She never talked about her dad. She always said it was just her mom in Ohio. I tried to remember our wedding. Her mom came alone. Sarah told me her dad. I passed away when she was young. I believed her. I never asked questions. I pulled out a leather-bound notebook. The cover was peeling. Inside were pages, and pages of handwritten formulas, compounding ratios, and notes written in English mixed with what looked like Latin botanical names. Formulas for aconitum. Napalus extracts. Atropa belladonna tincture. Notes on alkaloids. Extraction. Methods, side effects, and lethal dosages. I flipped frantically. My eyes landed on a specific page. Compound derived from aconitum, monkshood, combined with Pinellia and refined toxins. Effect: severe. Sedation, analgesic, induces deep lethargy. Note: must use microdosing. Overdose causes extreme nausea, vertigo, and acute liver failure. My hands were shaking violently. At the bottom of the page was a messy scribble. Tested on mice. Safe dose. 0.2 milligrams per kilogram. Testing long-term compliance effects. I dropped the notebook onto the bed like it was on fire. My heart pounded against my ribs. I looked around our perfectly decorated suburban bedroom. Everything felt deeply alien. The closet, the vanity, the pillows on the bed, they were all staring at me, mocking me. Who have you been living with for 3 years? I stumbled out of the room. I practically fell into the kitchen, tore open the pantry, and grabbed the amber vial. I held it up to the afternoon light. The pale yellow powder had tiny, almost microscopic black specks in it. I smelled it. Again. The sharp, bitter scent of potent chemicals and raw earth. I put it back and collapsed into a dining chair. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind. The meek, submissive wife. The perfectly timed dinners. The unnerving smile. The dead silence. It was all by design. She wasn't a victim. She was. I couldn't even finish the thought. I remembered a time, about a year ago, when I got a horrible flu. I was bedridden with a high fever. Sarah stayed by my side, nursing me back to health. She fed me soup. She gave me medicine. I remembered her giving me tiny, dark, brown capsules. She told me they were high-grade holistic supplements to boost my immune system. I took them. I got better. But thinking back on it now, my blood ran cold. Was it medicine, or was it something else? My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. I'm so scared. I just threw up blood. Can you take me to the ER? I stared at the screen, paralyzed. Then I looked toward the kitchen. Sarah was standing there. Her posture perfect, hair tied back. She was washing rice, getting ready to cook dinner. Her movements were slow, methodical, hauntingly familiar. I grabbed my car keys. Sarah turned around. Where are you going? Dinner's almost ready. I looked at her, trying to keep my voice steady. I have to run an errand. I'll be right back. She smiled and nodded. Okay, come back soon. I'm making that steak and mashed potatoes you love. I ran to my car, started the engine, and peeled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw Sarah standing at the front door watching me leave. She was still smiling that warm, gentle smile. But I knew now that beneath that smile was a completely different person. Someone I had never met in the 3 years we'd been married. On the way to Hannah's apartment, my mind raced. What should I do? Call the police? Confront Sarah? Or pretend I knew nothing and keep living this nightmare? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. I was married to a stranger. I got Hannah to the ER. They hooked her up to IV fluids and put her under observation. They suspected acute food poisoning, but her symptoms pointed to heavy chemical exposure. I stood in the hospital hallway, looking through the Rosen 8 glass at Hannah lying there, looking like a ghost. I gripped my jacket pocket. The amber vial was inside. I had grabbed it from the pantry before leaving. I couldn't go home. I couldn't stay at the hospital. I sat in my car, staring at the vial under the glow of the streetlights. The powder seemed to shimmer, ominously. I thought of the notebook, the formulas, the pharmacy degree, the dead-eyed smile. I dialed my best friend, Mike. He was a toxicologist at a private clinical lab. I have a sample I need tested. It's an absolute emergency, I told him. He told me to meet him at the lab first thing in the morning. I slept in my car in the hospital parking lot. I texted Sarah. Got called out of town for an emergency work trip. Be back in a few days. She replied instantly. Okay, honey. Be safe. I'll have a new recipe waiting for you when you get back. A new recipe. My blood ran cold. The next morning, I met Mike at his lab. He handed me a visitor badge and took the vial. He swirled it around, opened it, and gave it a cautious sniff. He frowned. Spices? Why the hell do you need me to test some turmeric? I stayed silent. Mike looked at my pale, exhausted face and didn't press. Further. Give me 2 hours. Those 2 hours felt like an eternity. I watched technicians in lab coats walk by. The hum of the centrifuges and the sterile smell of alcohol made me nauseous. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed it was just a weird spice blend. I prayed my wife was the boring, submissive woman I had taken for granted. The door opened. Mike walked out, his face dead serious. He pulled me into an empty office and locked the door. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. I swallowed hard. "Is there a problem?" Mike took off his glasses and looked me dead in the eye. "This isn't a spice. And it isn't a supplement. This is a highly concentrated compound containing aconitine and scopolamine mixed with heavy synthetic sedatives. In plain English, this is a chemical weapon. It's a paralyzing agent. In microdoses, it slows down reflexes, causes extreme fatigue, nausea, and disorientation. Prolonged use causes irreversible liver and kidney damage." I stopped breathing. Cold sweat poured down my neck. Mike leaned in. "What are you involved in, man? Where did you get this? Does this have to do with your family?" I didn't answer. I just stared at the vial on the desk. The innocent-looking powder was a lethal weapon. "There's something else," Mike continued. "I found an incredibly rare synthetic inhibitor in this mix. It targets the central nervous system. It creates a mild chemical dependency while suppressing free will, meaning whoever takes this over a long period of time becomes highly docile, easily suggestible, and totally compliant. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I nodded, but the room was spinning. Docile. Compliant. Who had Sarah been giving this to? Hannah? Me? How many others? And why? Mike grabbed my shoulder. "This isn't a game. This is attempted murder. I know where this came from. You need to call the FBI or the local police right now. Don't try to handle this yourself." I just nodded blindly. I grabbed the vial, shoved it in my pocket, and walked out into the gray, overcast morning. I felt like I was falling down a bottomless elevator shaft. I drove back to Hannah's. She had been discharged and was resting in bed. When she saw me, she broke down, crying. "I'm so scared. The doctor said I was poisoned. They asked what I ate. I told them I only ate at your house." I hugged her, but I felt absolutely numb. I didn't know how to tell her the truth. I told her to get some sleep and went out to my car. I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother-in-law's number. I had literally never called her in my life. The phone rang. A raspy voice answered. "Hello? Hi, Mom. It's me, your son-in-law." Silence on the other end. Then, "Oh, is something wrong?" I wanted to ask about Sarah's dad. He passed away a long time ago, right?" A long, heavy pause. Then her voice changed, growing defensive. "Who told you he was dead?" My heart stopped. He's alive?" She sighed deeply. "He cut contact with us years ago. He's in federal prison. I don't like talking about him." "Why are you asking?" Just wondering. "Thank you." I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard. I dropped my phone. Sarah lied. Her dad was alive, a federal inmate, and she had cut ties with her mother to hide it. Why? I looked toward the horizon, where my suburban house sat waiting for me. Inside was a woman waiting to serve me new recipes to make me more compliant. I remembered something else. When I had pried open the false bottom in her drawer, I had seen a small wooden box pushed all the way to the back. I hadn't opened it. I drove home like a maniac. I ran inside. The house was empty. A note on the counter read, "Ran to the neighbor's house to drop off some food. Heat up dinner, if you're hungry." I ignored it and sprinted to the bedroom. I tore open the drawer and pulled out the wooden box. It was padlocked. I smashed the lock with a hammer from the setter. Garage. Inside was another notebook and dozens of small vials. I opened the notebook. It was a diary. Her handwriting was meticulous. I flipped to the latest entries. "Today, he brought that little tramp into my house. Good. Everything is going exactly to plan. I'll start dosing her slowly. Soon, she won't be able to function without feeling terrified. And he'll learn what it means to live in silence." My vision blurred. I flipped back a few pages. Dad taught me how to control people. Not with screaming or violence, but with extreme patience, with fake kindness, with a warm meal. They will never suspect a thing. They will gladly put on the leash themselves. And by the time they realize it, it will be far too late. I looked down at the vials in the box. Color-coded labels. Mild sedative. Deep. Sleep. Neurological inhibitor. High-dose aconitum. I collapsed onto the floor. My house, my wife, my entire life for the past 3 years, it was all a meticulously crafted stage play. And I, the arrogant, cheating husband who thought I held all the power, was nothing but a fat, clueless rat in a maze. My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. I just remembered something. While you were in the bathroom that night, your wife made me herbal tea. She said it would help me sleep. I drank it. Did she? I couldn't read the rest. I stared at the bottles of poison glittering under the bedroom lights. A beautiful, deadly arsenal. Then, I heard the front door open. The soft padding of her slippers on the cating. Hardwood floor. Honey? Are you home? Have you eaten yet? I looked at the smashed drawer, the scattered vials, the open diary. I heard her. Footsteps approaching the bedroom. I didn't have time to hide anything. She stood in the doorway. She looked at me on the floor, then at the drawer, then at the vials. She smiled. But this time, it wasn't her gentle, maternal smile. It was a cold, calculating, terrifying smirk. So, you're home early. I don't remember how I got out of that room. I just remember running, shoving, past her, sprinting out the front door, jumping into my car and flooring it. I didn't look back. I couldn't look into her eyes again. That smirk was permanently burned into my retinas. I pulled into the parking lot of a random diner, slumped over the steering wheel, shaking uncontrollably. I walked inside, ordered a black coffee, and chugged it. I looked at the photos on my phone. The diary entry, he brought that little tramp into my house. Good. Everything is going exactly to plan. What plan? To make us dependent? To turn us into her puppets? I thought of all. The meals she cooked, the time she nursed me back to health, the time she poured me drinks after a long day. I thought it was love. It was a lab. Experiment. I broke down. Sitting in a crowded American diner, a grown man sobbing like a cotter's child. People stared, but I didn't care. I cried for my own stupidity. I cried. For the 3 years, I lived a lie. I cried for Hannah and what she was going through, and I cried because I was paralyzed by absolute terror. I called Mike. He picked up immediately. What's wrong? Did you call the cops? I found a whole box of them, I choked out. And a diary. She wrote that. It's a plan. Mike was quiet for a second. Listen to me very carefully. You need to go to the police right now. You are in immediate danger. How do I go to the police? I yelled into the phone. I tell them my wife is poisoning me and my mistress? They'll ask why, and I'll have to tell them I'm a serial cheater who brought his mistress into her home. I look like the villain. Mike sighed. You are a villain, man. But you need to think about your life and that girl's life. This stuff destroys the brain. If you don't stop this, you're both going to end up dead or in an asylum. I hung up. He was right, but I was terrified. Terrified of the police, terrified of the public humiliation, and most of all, terrified of Sarah. I wondered what her ultimate goal was. Revenge? To keep me from leaving? Or was this her twisted way of protecting our marriage? For the next few days, I lived in a state of sheer paranoia. I went home. I slept next to her. But every meal was psychological torture. I stared at every piece of chicken, every bowl of soup, every glass of water. I faked being full. I faked having an upset stomach. She remained completely sweet and docile. Eat some more, honey. I made your favorite. I'm full, you eat it, I'd say, pushing the plate away. Okay, I'll save it for later, she'd smile. I started stalking my own wife. When she went to the farmer's market, I trailed her in a rental car. She bought normal groceries. But one day, she drove into a sketchy part of the city and went into a dingy, holistic apothecary. She was in there for 20 minutes. She walked out with a brown paper bag. I didn't dare follow her inside. That night, I checked her purse while she was in the shower. I found bags of raw, dried roots and seeds. I took pictures and sent them to Mike. Aconite, belladonna root. Highly toxic, he replied. I sat on the bathroom floor, trembling. I knew I had to do something, but I couldn't pull the trigger. Every time I decided to call the cops, she would walk into the room with laundry or vacuum the rug, looking so normal that I questioned my own sanity. Was I being crazy? Did I read too many thriller novels? But then I would catch her staring at me. When she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes would lock onto me with clinical detachment. like a scientist observing a rat in a cage. I texted Hannah every day. She was still sick. I wired her money and told her to go to a specialist. I'm so scared I have a permanent disease, she texted. I couldn't tell her the truth. One night, lying next to Sarah, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. I whispered, "Who are you? What did you do to me?" No answer, just her steady breathing and the ticking of the clock. The next morning, I woke up to find breakfast ready. She sat across from me, smiling. "Is it good?" she asked. I nodded, keeping my eyes glued to my plate. I couldn't live like this. I had to confront her. I had to know the truth, even if it meant admitting what a monster I was. I looked at her washing dishes. The morning sun hit her back. She looked like a beautiful, perfect suburban wife. A woman I had never loved, never respected. And now, she was the most dangerous predator I had ever met. "Are you going to the office today?" she asked, turning around. "Ooh, yeah," I stammered. "Okay, I'm making something totally new for dinner. Be home on time." I nodded, grabbed my keys, and walked out. I looked back and saw her watching me from the kitchen window. I knew I had to make a choice today. I drove to a cheap motel where Hannah was hiding out. She was curled up in bed, throwing up bile. I knew what I had to do. I would go home tonight and lay everything on the table. When I walked through my front door that evening, I stopped dead in my tracks. Sarah was sitting in the living room. On the coffee table in front of her was a massive, thick manila folder. She looked up at me. That same chilling, dead-eyed smirk from the other day was back. "You're home. Sit down. We need to talk." I didn't move. "What's wrong? Are you scared?" she chuckled. "Did you think you were the only one who got to pull the strings in this house?" I swallowed hard and slowly sat on the edge of the armchair across from her. She slid the manila folder toward me. "Open it." My hands shook as I flipped open the cover. Inside were dozens of 8x10 glossy photographs. Me and Hannah at the coffee shop. Me and Hannah at the motel. Me kissing Hannah in my car. I flipped the page. Printouts of text messages. My entire chat history with Hannah, down to the timestamps. I flipped again. A USB drive. "Plug it into your laptop," Sarah commanded. I did. It was an audio file. I clicked play. It was a recording of me and Hannah talking on the phone. "I miss you so much. I miss you too." I slammed the laptop shut. The blood drained from my face. Sarah sat back, resting her chin on her hand, looking entirely bored. You hired a private investigator?" I choked out. She laughed. "No, I'm just protecting my assets. You are my husband. You are my asset. I have a right to know what my assets are doing, don't I?" She tossed another stack of papers at me. Bank statements. Every single ATM withdrawal I made to give Hannah cash. Credit card statements highlighting every hotel, every dinner, every piece of jewelry I bought her. She had everything. Cold sweat dripped down my back. "Don't worry," Sarah said, her voice smooth as silk. "I haven't done anything with these yet. I was just collecting data. In case I needed leverage." She stood up, walked to the TV stand, grabbed an iPad, and tossed it into my lap. A video was playing. It was shot from the corner of our own kitchen. A hidden camera. It showed me and Hannah sitting at the dining table, eating that pot roast. It showed Hannah looking terrified, and me looking like a coward. The next video showed us in the living room whispering. The next showed me walking Hannah to the door. I looked up at her, horrified. "You put hidden cameras in our house?" She nodded. "Yep, 2 years ago. Right around the time you started working. Late. Right around the time you started taking your phone into the shower. Right around the time you started looking at me with absolute disgust." I was stunned. 2 years. She knew everything for 2 years. Every lie, every deception she had on tape. "Did you think you were so smart?" she sneered. "Did you think I was just some dumb housewife who only knew how to bake muffins and fold your laundry? You were dead wrong." She crossed her arms. "You saw my degree. I know chemistry. I know how to extract compounds that make people wide awake or put them in a coma. And I know how to gather intelligence. My dad taught me all of it before he went to federal prison." I flinched. Federal prison? Yes. 20 years for manufacturing unregulated holistic drugs that ended up killing a few people. But before the feds took him, he taught me one rule. Trust. No one but yourself. And if you want to keep what's yours, you have to be smarter than everyone else. She leaned over the table. I shrank back into the chair. What are you so scared of? I haven't hurt you. I'm just protecting my marriage. I knew you were. Cheating from day one. I just waited for you to walk right into my trap. And you did. She tapped the manila folder. I have enough evidence here to take you to court and leave you with absolutely nothing. Adultery, dissipation of marital assets, emotional abuse. I have a ruthless divorce attorney ready to go. I have the cameras, the texts, the financials. What do you have? You have a sick little mistress throwing up her guts because of some seasoning I put on her food. My eyes widened. You're admitting it. She threw her head back and laughed. Admitting what? Who's the witness? Where's the proof? The cops searched the house? I'll just tell them those vials are herbal. Supplements I mix for my husband's health. You've been eating them for 3 years, haven't you? You're not dead. You're perfectly healthy, working full time, screwing around on the side. They're just vitamins, honey. I grabbed the arms of the chair. I felt like I was suffocating. As for your little girlfriend, Sarah continued, I gave her a microdose. Just enough to make her sick, paranoid, and miserable. She'll go to the doctor. They'll say she has a weird chemical in her blood. And then what? She tells the cops she ate dinner at my house? I invited her in. I served her a lovely meal. Maybe she took some bad party drugs on her own time. Who knows? You're completely insane, I whispered. Her eyes turned to ice. I'm insane? You dragged your whore into my house? Treated me like a ghost for 3 years. And I'm insane? You're the idiot who... I thought I would just stay quiet forever. I stayed quiet because I was waiting. For checkmate. And here we are. She pulled a document from the bottom of the folder and slapped it onto the table. This is a divorce settlement. My lawyer drafted it. I want 80% of our joint accounts, your 401k, and you will buy out my equity in this house at above market value plus monthly alimony. You sign this, and none of this evidence goes public. You can go live your trashy life with your little girlfriend. I won't stop you. I stared at the legal document. The words blurred together. If you don't sign it, she whispered, I will send this folder to the judge, to your company's HR department, and to your parents. You will be fired, disgraced, and broke. And do you really think Hannah is going to stick around when she finds out you're a broke, pathetic loser who got outsmarted by his stay-at-home wife for 3 years? I looked up at her face, the gentle Ohio farm girl face. But her eyes were an abyssal black hole. I realized I had never looked into her eyes. If I had, I would have seen the darkness pooling there years ago. You thought we were playing checkers, she said softly. I finished this chess match 2 years ago. You were just a pawn I left on the board until I was ready to end the game. She stood up, smoothed out her sweater, and smiled. That terrifyingly normal smile. Think it over. I'm going to make dinner. Want to stay? I'm trying a new recipe. I watched her walk into the kitchen. The folder, the photos, the flash drive, and the divorce papers sat on the table like a bomb. I didn't know how long I sat there. When I finally stood up, my legs gave out, and I almost crashed into. On the coffee table, I heard the sound of a knife chopping vegetables in the coffee kitchen. The smell of garlic and butter hitting a hot pan. Another normal evening. But I was no longer the master of the house. I was the puppet, and she was holding all the strings. I don't remember picking up the pen. I just remember my hand shaking so badly that my signature looked like a jagged scar on the paper. Sarah walked out, picked up the document, checked the signature, and nodded. Good. You're smarter than I thought. I didn't say a word. I just walked out to my car and drove straight to Hannah's motel. I had to warn her. I had to tell her everything. But when I pulled up, Hannah was sitting on the curb outside her room, clutching her luggage, sobbing, hysterically. Her face was gray. When she saw me, she ran over and grabbed my shirt. She came here. Your wife came here. My heart stopped. What did she say? Hannah choked on her sobs. She showed me the photos, the texts, and my lab results. She told me exactly what she put in my food, but she smiled and said it was just a mild sedative, that it would wear off. She just wanted to show me what happens when you mess with someone else's family. I stood there, paralyzed. Hannah pulled an envelope from her pocket. She told me to take this and go back to my hometown. She said if I ever came back to the city, she would send the purslane, photos and the videos to my parents, my friends, and my boss. Inside, there's a cashier's check for $5,000. I stared at the envelope. It was real. Sarah had thought of absolutely everything. I'm leaving, Hannah cried. I'm so terrified of her. What do I do? I hugged her, but I felt nothing. You take the money and you go home. It's over, she won. I drove Hannah to the bus station that afternoon. She didn't speak the entire ride. Before getting out, she looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, I didn't. I know it would end up like this. It's not your fault, I said hollowly. It's mine. It's all my fault. I drove home. On the way, my phone pinged. A text from Sarah. Dinner's ready. I made pot roast. I know you love it. I laughed out loud. A manic, broken laugh. She was still cooking, still playing. The part. I walked into the house. The table was set. Pot roast, potatoes, green, beans. She sat across from me, smiling. Sit down. Eat. I sat down. I picked up my fork, but I couldn't bring myself to take a bite. I looked at her. Can I ask you one question? She spooned some gravy onto my plate. Sure. The vial in the cabinet, was it actually poison? She smiled and shook her head. No. It was just a heavy mix of chamomile, valerian root, and a mild herbal muscle relaxant. It just makes you groggy and gives you a stomachache if you take too much. I've been taking it myself for years for anxiety. I stared at her. But you put it in Hannah's food. You made her think she was poisoned. I made you think she was poisoned, Sarah corrected, her eyes sparkling. If I didn't do that, you wouldn't have been scared. You wouldn't have snooped. You wouldn't have found the vial, or broken into my lockbox, or read my diary. I needed you to find those things. I needed you to be terrified. Because only when you were completely terrified would you sign everything over to me without a fight. It was psychological. I was speechless. The toxic vials in the box. Real, she nodded. My dad's old stash. I kept them as a souvenir. I never used them. I just kept them around, in case I needed to put on a show. She looked at me, her gaze softening just a fraction. See? I didn't do anything illegal. I just put props on a stage, and you wrote your own horror movie in your head. And when you were scared enough, I stepped in, offered a way out, and you took it. I sat there, totally defeated. She took a bite of her food, chewing slowly. Then, she looked up, and for the first time, her voice cracked. Do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the cheating. It wasn't you bringing her here. It was the fact that for 3 years you never actually looked at me. I was just a maid you could sleep with. I didn't exist to you. Her eyes grew red. I waited. I waited for you to ask me how my day was. To compliment my cooking. To hug me without expecting sex. 3 years and nothing. She wiped a single tear from her cheek and smiled a bitter smile. But I learned from my dad. If people don't see you, you have to make them see you. And I did. You finally see me now, don't you? I looked at her. For the first time in 3 years, I truly looked at her. The woman I had ignored, disrespected, and betrayed. She was brilliant. She was ruthless. And she was the monster I created. When did you start planning? I whispered. 2 years ago, the day I found out about Hannah. I knew you'd eventually bring. I'm her here. I just spent 2 years getting ready for it. She pointed her fork at my plate. Eat. It's getting cold. I took a bite of the pot roast. It was perfect. Tender, flavorful. My favorite meal. But everything had changed forever. I looked back at the last 3 years. The clues were right in front of my face. On our wedding day, she looked at me with glowing eyes. Was that love? Or a start of a calculation? When she waited up for me every night, was she being a loyal wife? Or logging my schedule? When she packed my bags for Napa, was she slipping a GPS tracker inside? When she was looking at her laptop and closed it, Quickly, was she looking at recipes or watching the hidden cameras? When she sat in the dark living room at 2 a.m., was she crying or was she watching the Monsitas' driveway to see who dropped me off? I thought her silence was a weakness. I didn't realize it was the patience of an apex predator. We sat in the living room late into the night. I finally asked her, "Why didn't you just leave? Why go through all of this?" She looked out the window into the dark suburban street. I almost did. I packed my bags a dozen times. But then I'd look at the kitchen, and I'd wonder who was, "I'm gonna cook for you. I loved you. I was pathetic enough to still love you, but I knew I couldn't live as a ghost in my own home. I had to force you to see me. I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted you to realize that I am not a shadow. I can do things that would terrify you. Do you hate me?" I asked quietly. "I did," she said, her eyes welling up again. "I hated you so much I wanted to burn this house down. But I kept it inside, because if I screamed, you'd call me crazy. By staying silent, I made myself something you have to respect. Something you have to fear." She stood up and looked down at me. "I don't hate you anymore. I'm just tired. I'm tired of loving someone who doesn't see me." She walked toward the bedroom. "Go to sleep. I'll make breakfast in the morning." I sat alone on the couch, burying my face in my hands. The tears finally came. I cried for my arrogance. I cried for the 3 years I wasted. I cried for the woman in the next room who loved me so much. She was willing to become a villain, just to get my attention. I didn't deserve forgiveness. The next morning, she was already up. Breakfast was on the table. One plate. She was sitting at the island, looking out the window. "Eat up," she said. I sat down. "What happens now?" "I filed the divorce papers this morning," she said clinically. "You keep the house, but you pay out my 80% over the next 6 months. I'm moving back to Ohio. I'm going to open a holistic pharmacy. I'll be fine." "And me?" I asked. She looked at me with hollow eyes. "That's your problem. You can go find Hannah, but I doubt she wants anything to do with you now. As for your job, you're safe. I won't leak the files. I just wanted you to know who I was." She walked into the bedroom and came out with a single suitcase. She had packed her life away with the same methodical precision she used to cook my dinners. I stood up. "Can I help you with that?" "No, I've got it." She walked to the front door. I followed. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know it. Doesn't mean anything now, but I'm truly sorry." She turned around, the morning sun hitting her face. "If you're sorry for cheating, I accept it. If you're sorry for not loving me, don't be. You can't force love." She opened the door. "Take care of yourself. Eat properly. And if someone ever cooks a meal for you again, actually look at them. Don't turn them into a ghost." She walked down the driveway. The wheels of her suitcase clicked against the pavement. She got into her car and drove away, leaving me standing in the doorway of an empty house. I walked back into the kitchen. My breakfast was getting cold. I sat down and forced myself to eat the eggs. They were tasteless. The silence in the house was deafening. I realized then that I had lost absolutely everything. Months have passed since the divorce was finalized. I paid her what I owed. I live alone in this big suburban house. Every night, I come home from work, the house is dark, and there is no smell of pot roast. No one asks me, "Did you eat yet?" I cook for myself, but it never tastes right. I clean the house, but it never feels clean. I look at the empty chair across the table. I wonder what Sarah is doing right now. Is someone asking her how her day was? I texted her once, just to see how she was. She replied formally, "I'm doing well, thank you." That was it. The door was permanently closed. I'm sharing this story because I know there are guys out there right now acting exactly like I did, taking their partners for granted, thinking a quiet wife is a weak wife. Let me tell you the hardest lesson I ever learned. Never underestimate a quiet woman. Silence isn't always submission. Sometimes it's calculation. Sometimes it's a woman collecting data, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If you have someone at home who cooks for you, cleans for you, and waits up for you, go look at them today. Really look at them. Ask them how they are doing. Appreciate the mundane, boring routine of a healthy marriage, because Maintaining that peace takes a massive amount of silent, unrewarded effort. Don't wait until you're sitting alone in a dark kitchen, eating cold food, realizing that the woman you treated like a piece of furniture was the only thing holding your life together. Because by the time the quiet ones finally speak up, it's already too late. You've already lost the game,